This is the story of a stranger who intentionally harms a child. It's morally quite confronting because when you actually hear the circumstances, part of you cheers. The title for today's post is, "I gave in to my intrusive thoughts and tripped a child on purpose." So, this happened last Saturday. My significant other and I had nothing to do and decided in the last minute to see Wreck-It Ralph at the movies. It was 9 p.m, subtitled, the dubbed screenings are earlier in the day, and with plenty of space in the theatre as only 10 out of the 200 seats were booked. Perfect. We went in to get seats and I realised the seats surrounding those we booked were occupied by young children, 6 to 7 years of age maybe. I really didn't feel like having popcorn thrown down my neck and having the soundtrack ruined by a chorus of loud chewing noises, so we moved a few seats away as the movie started. We were able to enjoy the movie uninterrupted until the last 20 minutes or so. One of the kids, presumably bored and high in sugar, started sprinting like a wild rabbit all around the theatre and through the rows of seats while trying to gain the attention from his company, mother or older sister, who shushed him, chased him some, and told him to get back to his seat, all to no avail. He made dramatic noises and bounced around, and in general just being disrespectful to both his mum/sister, who eventually gave up chasing him, which made him act even more dramatic, as well as the rest of the theatre. I wasn't mad as the movie was almost over, just a tiny bit annoyed. As the movie had finished, we were the last one to leave the theatre, and as we were walking down the corridor, the same kid comes sprinting in full speed back and forth, almost crashing into us. Whenever I'm annoyed by running kids, I feel the urge to see what would happen if I tripped them. Just as that thought popped into my head, my shoe nudged its way slightly to the left, just as he came running again, which sent him flying in full speed. He landed with a thump, looked up and gave me this terrifying face, and let the most demonic screech I've ever heard. Not the, "Oh no, I'm hurt" kind of screech, but more of a, "I'll rip your intestines out with my bare teeth and use them as a noose to end your life" kind of screech. His mother/sister came rushing and dusted him off as we continued walking off. I didn't really know what to expect to feel at that moment, but it was kind of satisfying knowing what it feels like to give in to the urge, that nobody will believe him if he said I tripped him. My significant other didn't notice that I did it. I'm an arsehole, yes, but the kid had it coming for him, in brackets, and no, he didn't hurt himself, it was a soft flaw. So there's the story. Up next, we've got the analysis. Okay, the first question we want to ask is, why is this child acting this way? And it's really no mystery. This mother took him to see a 9 p.m. showing of a movie. For a young child who's like 6 or 7, that's way too late. What are you thinking? The kid's overtired. Of course he's going to be hyperactive. On the whole, kids get bored with movies. They don't have fantastically long attention spans. And so even for a movie played at the appropriate time, I know a lot of children would have difficulty finishing it. But you start one at 9 p.m? There's no chance. This outcome was completely predictable. It's always strange in situations like this because your feelings of animosity and annoyance kind of get directed towards the child because they're the ones causing a ruckus. But as we know, it's not really the child's fault, it's the mother's. Where was the discipline? Even though this is just one incident, you can easily extrapolate from this situation and say with confidence that this child does not encounter enough boundaries when it comes to his behaviour. Let's run through a hypothetical situation. The next time this child acts out in public, if the mother takes him home, puts him in his room, explains exactly why his behaviour was wrong, and says, "You're not going to eat dinner tonight, but of course if you act properly in public next time, everything will be normal, you'll get your meals." That child might try it once or twice more, but if he sees complete consistency with consequences for his behaviour, he'll stop doing it. Unfortunately, a lot of people are just not prepared to be parents. They get into it by accident or without thinking, and they certainly got no education or skills in the process. They don't really know what to do, and they don't understand how important consistency and boundaries are when it comes to raising children. All too often, the parents themselves are under pressure or under a lot of stress, and even if they know that they need to be consistent with their children, they just give in because the short-term pain is too much. It's easier to just let the child do what they need to do because you don't provoke a fight, an argument, or a tantrum. But there is a huge cost to that short-term relief, both in terms of consequences for future behavior and in psychological harm that you do to the child. Without boundaries, a child doesn't feel safe. They don't feel like there's a steady anchor in the world, moral guidance from a higher authority, letting them know when they have and have not crossed the line. That makes them feel extremely insecure, and they get more and more desperate for boundaries, and so they act out further and further, eventually running around public movie theaters in a desperate attempt to have an adult step in and say, "No, this is not appropriate." They might resist for a little while, but that resistance is just them testing the boundaries because when those boundaries do come, it actually makes them feel even more safe. I can throw a huge tantrum, but still there's something immovable. The adults around me have got this under control. One thing that we don't speak about much in our society is the idealization of children, which is rampant. A lot of people, specifically those who've never had children, tend to think of them as these pure, unspoiled, angelic beings. Of course, that can be the case. If you do a search on YouTube for cute babies and toddlers, you'll see some absolutely heartwarming videos, really beautiful stuff. But the fact that they can be fantastic doesn't take away from the fact that children can absolutely be monsters. And I really mean that in the sense of savage, vicious little creatures. There's a wonderful book, it's quite old now, written by William Golding. It's called Lord of the Flies. And it's about a bunch of prepubescent boys who crash on an island from an airplane, and they're left to fend for themselves without adults. And the point of the book really shows that it's civilization that makes children grow into adults that have morals and sensible limits. When left to their own devices, the children are savage, and it turns really dark. I don't want to spoil it, so read the book if you haven't done so already. The point is that up until a certain age, you can't really expect children to have their own moral compass for guiding situations on how they should act and how they should behave. That's really up to the adults. This is why it's essential for parents to instill firm boundaries, and when those boundaries are crossed, to bring on firm consequences. Because children are really only as well behaved as their consequences. I have seen some people make the connection between how you raise children and how you conduct yourself in a relationship. So if you allow a tantrum from a child to go unpunished with zero consequences, well, of course they're going to throw another tantrum a week later. Why not? It was effective. Likewise, if you allow your partner to disrespect you or to have an affair and you provide no consequences, well, what's to stop them from doing the exact same thing a month later? Of course, there is some logic to that, but when I hear people say that, I can't help but think they're missing the point. Because do you really want to be with a partner who you have to treat like a child and instill consequences? Don't you want to find a higher quality partner, someone who's capable of self-regulation and has their own developed moral compass so you don't need to be watching them all the time? In this fantastic book, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, he has a chapter that's along the lines of, don't let your children do anything that's going to make other people dislike them. It's one of my favorite chapters in the book because it really fleshes out what exactly is cruel when it comes to parenting. Is instilling boundaries and placing limits on your child cruel? Is making them go without dinner when they've misbehaved cruel? Is locking them in a room in solitary confinement cruel? Is spanking cruel? Possibly. Everybody will have their own limits when it comes to those kind of consequences, but you can make the case that it is a lot more cruel to not instill those boundaries. If a child doesn't learn how to behave, to share with others, to be properly socialized, then they're not going to be liked by their peer group. And if the other kids don't like your child, then they're not going to be invited to go on sleepovers, to participate in games. That's going to create a really, really strong antisocial effect, and that's going to be devastating for that child's development. In that sense, it's a lot more cruel. Jordan Peterson also talks about how essential it is that other adults like your child. If your child is acting in a way that makes other adults turn up their noses at them and kind of give them negative reinforcement, well, that's going to be terrible. What you want is other adults smiling at your child, beaming at them, showering them with love and positivity and affirmation. That's going to really, really help their self-esteem and be a positive force in their emotional development. And so yes, it feels cruel at the time to set down a boundary like making your child go without dinner. But if the consequence is that they become a much more well-behaved child so that other children and other adults like them a lot more, well, ultimately, you've got to be cruel to be kind, because the short-term pain is definitely worth the long-term benefits. Now, just on a personal note, I want to make it clear that I'm in no way advocating violence against children. I don't think that that's acceptable. For anybody who's in doubt on this issue, I really recommend that you look at the works of the child psychologist Alice Miller, particularly the book The Drama of the Gifted Child. I've read many of her works, but you can start with that one. Fantastic stuff. What's a lot better than just resorting to physical punishment is making sure that the consequences fit the crime. If a child was acting carelessly and they spill something and creates a huge mess, well, then they should be the ones to clean it up by themselves. They should feel the full impact of their decisions. But even while you're punishing your child, it is absolutely essential that they know that they're loved and supported. You want to make any consequences that you impose about the behavior and not about the person. You're not a bad child, you just did a bad thing. But If you apologize and take the appropriate actions, then you'll be forgiven and you have a clean slate once again. You'll be trusted once you've demonstrated that you've earned the responsibility of my trust. And so, when it comes to this story of a stranger tripping up a child who's misbehaving, there is part of me, the part of me that knows that it's good for children to have boundaries, that cheers a little bit. I know it's not fantastic and it's not exactly a well thought out disciplinary approach with very set consistencies and boundaries, just tripping up a child randomly. But there is a part of you that goes, this will be good for you. You are running. One of the consequences of running is that you might get hurt or you might hurt others. And here you got to feel the full consequences of your decision. But there's also a large part of me that didn't like his behavior and doesn't like the story because really he should be speaking to the mother. It's not the child's fault, really. Violence is definitely not a precedent that we want to set. We don't want people wantonly running around tripping up other people's children. That's not good. So even though it wouldn't have the immediate satisfaction of just tripping up the misbehaving child, obviously if you were really feeling inclined and you wanted to make yourself part of this situation, the best thing would have been to approach the mother. Now, if you're going to do that, it's absolutely imperative that you don't shame her. For one thing, if you do that, she's just going to get defensive and you're not going to have any impact anyway. And on the other hand, you don't know what's going on in her life. You don't know what kind of stresses she's under, why she's had to bring her children to the movies at 9 p.m. For all you know, she might have lost her husband as he was serving in the military overseas the night before and she doesn't know how to cope. You can't make too many assumptions, and so if you approach a stranger like this, you've got to do so non-judgmentally and with a hugely open mind. I think that the most effective approach in this situation would have been to just express sympathy to her, to let her know that parenting is hard and that you hope that she finds the strength. For most people, if they're failing, they don't need to be told that they're failing. They know that they're failing. What they need is a kind word, a nod, just a hint that there's some shared humanity between you, some compassion. So yeah, there you have it. Obviously a pretty strange situation. I hope that this man managed to satisfy his curiosity as to what it would feel like to trip a child. And I wish the mother the best of luck in hopefully instilling some discipline on this child. It would be good for her, be good for moviegoers everywhere, and most importantly, some boundaries would be really, really good for this child. Next up, I'm going to look at some of the comments on this post from Reddit. I once tried to tell my daughter like 1 billion times that pushing her siblings was wrong. On the 1,000,000th and first time, I pushed her back. She fell straight into a door jamb and smashed her nose. Mortified I was, but I wasn't letting her know that. I told her, now I know how your brother and sister feel. Upside, she never pushed her siblings again. Downside, she likes to bring up my cruelty every chance possible. Sometimes mums can't win. Look, I'm not in that family. I don't want to cast judgment. I don't really like that, teaching somebody about violence with more violence. But it seems like the lesson got through. She says that she brings up the cruelty every chance possible. Well, she understands now that pushing people is cruelty, so I guess it worked. I work with students who have disabilities, and I tell parents their job is to raise kids other people can stand to be around. Disability is no excuse, and they'll have an easier time in society if they're taught how to behave. Yes, this ties into my point of what Jordan Peterson talks about. Don't let your children do anything that makes other people dislike you. Even if life is hard, you have a disability or anything like that, it's ultimately a lot kinder to them to go through the short-term pain of encouraging very specific behavior, because the consequences of being the kind of person that other people dislike, they last a lifetime. That's one of the consequences of running around like a wild animal. The kid should have been watching where he was going. Yeah, he should have. I love this story. It's so satisfying. Yeah, it is. It is kind of satisfying. I don't know. I don't feel that good about how satisfied I felt when I read it, though. I find it morally quite conflicting. Coming from a father of 5, you're not an asshole at all. My money is betting that the mum is a piece of shit that does nothing to discipline her child ever. It's just not helpful to label people a piece of shit. You don't know what's going on in her life. That kind of judgment, I just don't like. Probably buys him whatever games and screens will keep him busy while teaching him no real life values or morals. So I know I'm interrupting the comment again, but this still bothers me. Like, what does this person assume about the mother? That she's just had a perfect life, that everything's been easy for her, but she's just inherently lazy, that it would be easy for her to do other things? Like, there are lazy people out there, absolutely, but bad behavior doesn't arrive out of a vacuum. Bad parenting doesn't come from a vacuum. This culture of just instant judgment, I really think needs to end, because we need to look deeper beneath the surface to find out what's actually going on for people. Hopefully this kid remembers you and it has a lasting impact on who he becomes. We need less little shits like that in our world. We need less misbehaving children and more well-adjusted, socially likable children. That's the way that I would have put it. That is the end of the video. Very strange story. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have a story that you'd like me to do a video on, make sure to send me a private email. Or if you want to join our private community over at Patreon, show some support for the creator, click on the link below. I'd love to see you over there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you again next time.